Psychological safety is simply making sure that people have the right and the freedom without fear to express their best ideas and to be themselves. Because what happens, the way that we stifle creativity and innovation is through fear. And if we are in fear of losing our job, of our livelihood, of coming home and not being able to support our families, then we're not going to think outside the box and propose things that are potentially going to elevate the organization time and time again, but we're too worried to be controversial.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of The Conscious Capitalists with myself, Timothy Henry, and my partner in making the world a better place through business, Raj Sisodia. Hey there, Raj.
Hi, Timothy. Good to be with you again.
Good to be with you. You're fighting a bit of a cold there. We can hear that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you for bearing with that. And over in London, we have a special guest today, Elina Teboul, who has a new book coming out end of this month called Feminine Intelligence. And talk about an interesting background. She started off with a BA in economics, became a lawyer, worked for one of the big law firms in New York, Davis Polk, joined a foundation where she was sort of general counsel for a while before going back to Columbia and getting her MA in clinical psychology. She now acts as a leadership coach, getting her accreditation from a Columbia University's coaching certification program. She is an adjunct professor at Fordham Law School, where she teaches on positive lawyering. And to make it even more exciting, in 2023, she got her certificate in psychedelic-assisted therapies and research from the California Institute of Integral Studies. Elina Teboul, welcome.
Thank you so much, Timothy, Raj. So great to be here. Hearing that bio, it sounds like I've spent way too much time in school.
Well qualified young lady. All
Well,
right.
I never left school. I went to school at age 5, and I'm still in a school setting ever since. So
Yeah.
some of us move on, others remain stuck.
Maybe begin with a little bit of background. Introduce us to the concept of feminine intelligence. What does that mean, and why did you write the book now?
Great. Thanks so much. So first of all, to all of our male listeners, don't worry. This is not a men versus women book. And it's very important to understand that the feminine is about feminine values and principles and strengths. And it's about the feminine archetype, which is within all of us. So just like Carl Jung explains that in order for us to be whole, to achieve individuation, we have to bring together the feminine and the masculine within all of us. So I might be in a female body, but most certainly I am very often in my masculine, and that is great when I want to be efficient and productive and accomplish certain tasks. And then other times I am in my feminine, which again has nothing to do with my appearance, does not have to do with my gender, but it has to do with an approach that I take, whether it's about empathy, interconnection, connection with nature, which is often associated with the feminine. And it is about bringing these values and these principles into business leadership and elevating our consciousness through connecting to this part of ourselves so that we can be better business leaders.
So this is about personal integration and being internally integrated between the masculine, traditionally labeled masculine traits and the traditionally labeled feminine traits, and accepting that that language no longer serves us, that in fact we have both in us, and what you want to be able to do is find what that balance looks like for you. Is that right?
Well, I would say that language actually is really important, and not that it doesn't serve us, but that we should lean into it. So for a long time, for 2 years as I was writing this book, one of the biggest considerations was, do I use this language? Do I use the word feminine? Because we have such a emotional response when we hear this word. So when I interviewed a lot of female business executives, very senior women, very successful women, the initial response was actually one of a little bit of nervousness. What do you mean by the feminine? And what kind of box are you trying to put us into? And I thought that this was really interesting, and that if I was to say, okay, let's call it connected leadership or any, yin leadership, a lot of other words that I could have potentially used, I think that it would be trying to hide from a concept that lives in our collective subconscious. We have been using this terminology of feminine and masculine to explain how we see the world, our identities, and for some reason it's become almost radioactive, that there is something wrong with this word. And I would constantly hear things like, I don't want to be associated with a stereotype, and I'm too scared almost to show weakness because the feminine is so much associated with weakness. So I got a lot of pushback when I was using this word, and I thought, if there's such an emotionally charged reaction, I have to use this word. It's almost one of the most important reasons for using it is to advocate and to redefine what the feminine actually is. And what was even more interesting and surprising is that a lot of men really connected with the terminology. And of course, Raj has written Shakti Leadership. So I know that Raj is one of the biggest supporters of bringing the feminine into business leadership, which is, of course, why I'm so excited to be having this conversation. But for many men, they don't necessarily associate themselves with wanting to connect to the feminine. And because we're all dissociated from this essence of ourselves and we're leaning so far into those traits that are often associated with the masculine, we really are missing this inner life force that is where our purpose and our values live, and that ignites us. So I really felt like I had to go on a defense of the feminine.
Yeah, well, congratulations, first of all, Elina, on writing a wonderful book.
Thank
I
you.
was very pleased to write the foreword for it. And I think you've done a great job integrating the various strands of knowledge and making this case, which I think is as important as ever. When we started the conscious capitalism movement, I did observe early on that there was more feminine energy in these companies. They used words like love and compassion and caring and empathy. And even though most of them were led by men, we found those qualities in those leaders as well. And so we had done a conference on the rise of feminine values, which eventually then led to Shakti leadership when Nilima and I came together. So, but there's still, as you said, a lot of resistance. It's kind of odd. Each of us comes from a mother and a father equally. And all the traditions give us this wisdom, whether it's the Western tradition of Carl Jung or the Indian tradition where we have the Ardhanareshwar, the half male, half female god, the depiction of Shiva and Shakti together as one, the yin yang, etc. And yet we've created a civilization and society which is very, very heavily rooted in one half of our beings. And would you say that many of our problems, whether they are ecological, whether they are in the workplace, are from this lack of balance, where we are not bringing in that complementary piece? And hence we are, what happens when we have an excess of masculine energy without the feminine energy? It becomes hyper-masculine. It becomes domination, aggression, competition, hyper-competition, winning at all costs. Everything becomes a war, right? And we need the feminine side.
Absolutely. And I think it's quite interesting that if I think back to when I was a baby lawyer and my first year at Davis Polk, and I actually remember that there weren't that many female partners at the time. And we had a lunch with the female associates, and we were sort of, coming in to meet the female partners. And the messaging around it was all about how to lean into your masculine. And I mean, of course, the Sheryl Sandberg lean in message was so prominent at the time. And so what the message that all of us received was, if you want to succeed in business, then you admire the male partners, you try as much as you can to emulate their style, and this is how you succeed. And that if you bring your more authentic self to work, then that is going to be viewed as not as serious. And if you start talking about things like love, then it's going to be just completely ridiculous. And you're wearing a mask for most of the time. And I notice this a lot actually when I work with female executives. So I do a lot of peer coaching. So I bring groups of 10, 12 women together, and they're all very senior in their careers. And it's amazing how the conversations start. The first time that I'll meet a group, they'll be very serious, like chief senior leaders WhatsApp group. And everyone goes by their LinkedIn titles and everyone explains their, educational background. And I always start to try to emulate and to say, here is my vulnerable side. Here are the things that I worry about. Here is my concerns and my fears and the things that I want to bring into the world and the places where I sometimes judge myself. And I notice that people are so surprised because they're not expecting that. And little by little, as we go through these different meetings, once a month we meet with, and I've done this with so many groups of women, and it's always the same, that the beginning stages are so contrived, and that little by little, when people can take off the masks, they can feel whole, and they can see that it's not just them, that all of the women around them are doing the same thing. And that underneath that is this yearning to bring love and kindness and positivity to their jobs, to the workplace, to their communities. And when they allow themselves fully to be themselves and to integrate that part of themselves, then not only do they feel joy and love and purpose individually, then they have more courage to fight for certain aspects that they care about in their organizations, whether it was, around making other employees more empowered, whether it's around taking climate action, whatever it is, that the way that they want to bring it to life in their organization. But very often when we're wearing that mask and we're dissociated, then we don't have the courage to step into and advocate for the most important things in our organizations.
And you draw an interesting contrast between feminism, as traditionally understood as a movement going back decades, and the idea of feminine intelligence. If you can expand on that.
Yes. So feminism is about gender equality, which is extremely important. But feminine intelligence is not just about gender. It is about each one of us, regardless of our gender, being able to tap into those qualities. So you can have feminism where a woman has all of the equal pay and equal rights, and she's completely acting in her masculine, completely dissociated from her feminine essence and lacking joy and fulfillment and completion, even though she has all of the things that she fought for under feminism. And feminism sometimes also, unfortunately, creates, a man versus women divide. And whether this is right or wrong, because of course women have suffered under the patriarchy for a really long time until they want to fight for their rights. But, I think men have equally suffered under the patriarchy, just in a different way. That boys have also been taught, boys don't cry, boys shouldn't show emotion. I just saw recently an article come out with some of the Pew research that came out just in November that said that Republican men, 6 out of 10 Republican men think that the society has become too soft and feminine, and that men should stop showing these kind of qualities. And for me, this is really sad because it doesn't matter what our gender is. We're human. We need to feel emotion. We need to feel anger and sadness and joy and all of the essence of humanity. And feminism is about something completely different, I think. It is about women having equality, which is extremely important, but completely not the topic that I cover in the book.
Yeah, it's a very delicate balance in this dialogue, I think, because I could, and I'll take a slightly different view than Raj, I could listen to this so far and say, it's almost like we're saying there's the really good feminine intelligence over here, And then we've got this thing over here called masculine intelligence. And look what trouble it's gotten us into. And of course, then men are going to react and sort of, because they'll get confused and they will get confused over my maleness and my masculine intelligence and the patriarchy. So it does sometimes lead to this backlash and even unintendedly to sort of say, well, the masculine intelligence has gotten us in trouble. Look. And how do you respond to that? How do you sort of like, well, we got to, let's make sure we're not dishonoring the masculine intelligence.
I'm so glad that you said that, because this is so critical, that we absolutely need the balance of both. Because just like we've used the words toxic masculinity for a long time, there is equally the toxic feminine. The toxic feminine is jealous, manipulative, overly dependent, not able to take action. There is just as much toxicity in overbalancing and over-indexing on the feminine as there is on the masculine. And the reason that we have a lot of conversations around toxic masculinity is because in our society, we have over-indexed on the masculine and we haven't found that balance. And so 100%, there is nothing wrong with the masculine. And sometimes I'm in my masculine when I want to take action, when I want to be decisive, when I want to get things done and I want to be efficient. And sometimes you need competition, and sometimes even aggression is necessary in certain situations. There's nothing wrong with that. What I advocate for is making sure that we also bring in the feminine aspects, because that is where our creativity and our nurturing and our love comes, so that when we take action, it could be infused with those values.
Elena, there's an interesting parallel. I look at capitalism versus conscious capitalism, right?
Mhm.
And you could make a similar argument about what we're talking about. So capitalism has done great things for humanity and has brought us a lot of progress. But at the same time, we have created some suffering and we've inflicted some damage. Likewise, the male-dominated civilization that we've been part of for millennia has indeed resulted in a tremendous amount of human progress. But it has also created extraordinary amount of suffering, right? Thousands of wars and hundreds of millions, if not billions of people killed in those conflicts. So the absence of that feminine energy from capitalism and from the way we organize society has resulted in a lot of that suffering, right? And so we say business is great, capitalism is great, but conscious capitalism will take it to another level. It will not dilute the performance, but it'll actually enhance the other elements, right? The other aspects of life, and it'll not cause the kind of suffering that we're seeing, right? And Lynn Twist uses this metaphor, I think it comes from one of the indigenous traditions, which is that the bird of humanity has been flying for millennia with one wing tied behind its back, the feminine wing, and therefore the masculine wing has had to work overtime and become hyper dominant and even aggressive to keep the bird of humanity afloat. But with one wing, we fly around in circles and we don't get very far. And this is the century we're all seeing, that perhaps this is the time now that that feminine wing is unfurled and the bird of humanity can rise higher and go further and faster when it's about both of these things, right? So it's very important to say this is not about replacing one with the other. This is about saying, let's integrate both of these. That's a vital message, right?
It's actually one of my favorite metaphors that I use quite often as well. It's from, I think, an Indian tradition. And it's very beautiful. And I think it does reinforce the message that we need both. And the idea of conscious capitalism for me always resonated so much because my family left Russia at the collapse of the Soviet Union when I was just 6 years old. And it was very clear to me growing up with my parents who experienced that communism is something definitely worth running away from in the middle of the night, leaving everything you know and love behind, and coming to the US for the American dream. And so even though we are trying to improve capitalism and there's of course so much possibility in infusing it with love and kindness, it is the model that has created so much abundance for all of us. And that's how I think it's one of the first lines of the book, actually, is that I've always been a believer in capitalism, but there is a way to make it more conscious. And I think that bringing in the feminine is one of those ways.
Yeah, the phrase we're using is we want to celebrate and elevate capitalism. In particular, how do you elevate the practice of capitalism through more conscious leadership and conscious business practices? So I want to make one more sally into this area that as a Canadian, you don't want to be walking on thin ice, but I'll walk on thin ice for a moment, which is, but there is this pushback. You just referred to it. 6 out of 10 of people from a certain political view think that there's too much feminine intelligence and not enough masculine intelligence. And that's a signal of something. And I'm wondering, in your mind, what's it a signal of?
I wrote this book not in the current political climate. And it's very interesting for me now to see how it's being received and evolving with what is going on in US politics. And I think that because the pendulum swung very far one way over the last few years, a lot of people felt like they couldn't have their voice heard. And it did feel as though there was a message that all men have done something wrong, and that I'm the mother of an 11-year-old boy, and there were times where I really worried, and I thought, how do I explain to him what's going on? And how do I, if he was 16, it would be an even harder conversation to say that you're not at fault of anything, that there was a system in place that made other people feel as though particularly white men had all of the advantages. But how can one individual person, a young person especially, grow up under that kind of messaging? And what does that mean for their identity, for their sense of purpose, for their wanting to strive and succeed in the workforce, where they feel like actually they're going to be passed over for promotions because that's just not what we're looking for right now? And I do think a lot of men felt that way, and it wasn't addressed. And this is actually the kind of the message of feminine intelligence this is not a zero-sum game. And if we want to actually lead with feminine intelligence, that means to be conscious of how our message lands on other people and make sure that we bring them into the conversation and not determine that there's a group of people that have done something wrong and should be excluded and actually punished. There's a really interesting statistic that somehow when women participate in peace agreements, they are likely to they're like 15 times more likely to last up to 15 years or something like this. And the reason for that is because women tend to look at the other side and how they're making the other side feel, and make sure that they don't have this zero-sum game situation where they win completely and the other side is left with nothing. And I do think that this rise of a certain class of men, now we're seeing these references to the rise of the manosphere, and there's a part of me that worries, and there's a part of me that really understands that this is a result of the last few years, and I really do see where it's coming from.
Yeah, I think there's no doubt that there is a crisis out there on both sides. Um, Women have been making gains, certainly in education. If you look at percentage of students in high school who are valedictorians, I think 80% are girls in the US now. They're about 60% of college students. They get higher grades and graduate at a higher rate. So it's rapidly becoming, in a society where you need higher education for more and more things, women are gaining an advantage there. So we have to also pay attention to what's happening, as you said, with your son, with our boys, right? And why are they struggling? And maybe our educational system approaches have to change and so forth. But it's always been a challenge for us, even in the Shakti leadership work, where we've had the Shakti Fellowship, and about 20, 25 women go through that every year, or have been going through that in the past years. But we haven't been able to reach men, the message of Shakti leadership is similar to yours, right? It's not just that we need women to step up and step forward and be connected to their feminine and be out there in the world, but we also need men to be connected to that, right, in a healthy way. And there's still a resistance, I think, there. So reaching the men and getting them to be whole. We're not saying let go of your masculinity, but just be whole, right? You don't have to just manifest half of your being. Bring that other side in. I think that's been a challenge. Have you had pushback from men on the idea of, because we've almost made it like a kind of insult to men, right? If you compare them in any way with women, right? That's girly or that's whatever, right? And it's across cultures. It's quite shocking, actually.
This is why I think it's so important to be having this conversation. And I actually quote so many men in the book, and a lot of the business cases and examples that I use are from men, so that it could be inclusive and I think inspiring to men as well. And what I find interesting is I work a lot with one-on-one with people, and they come to me, they're, founder or they're in a C-suite, and they come to me for a business reason, usually. And inevitably, all of the business challenges and the strategy challenges end up with us exploring a lot of the personal. And because the way that we show up in business can't be segregated from who we really are. Leadership, it's autobiographical. And a lot of the, relationship problems we might have or questions we might have in business, they come back to who we are as a person, very often to our childhood and our relationships and what happened to us and the triggers, the way that we see the world. And men want to explore this too. The men that want to be the best leaders, that want to be the most successful, that want to create profit and success and be viewed in that way in their work, they want to be loved by their people. They are the ones who are most willing to dig and to see what is their, like, who are they really? And how can they bring that in authentically and courageously into their organizations? So I do think that the men who are actively seeking to be those conscious leaders, they're willing to do it. What's interesting is they're most willing to do it in a private context. So when we are together one-on-one, this is when they're able to express fully and completely and explore. And I think this is the difference when people are one-on-one and then when people are in large groups. Because when people are in large groups, then no one wants to raise their hand and say, I'd like to get in touch with my feminine side. But one-on-one, they do. And this is actually equally true of women, that when we are one-on-one or even in a very small group, they are much more likely to say that I've been suppressing this aspect of myself. I'm looking to get in touch with this aspect of myself. But in a large group, everyone has to wear the mask. They have to wear the shield because that is what society expects. And I think this is why it's so important for me to have this conversation publicly, because very often the things that we're willing to say privately, we're not willing to say publicly.
I want to build off of that because you almost started to talk in a way about making the business case for integrated leadership. So, if we were thinking about conscious leadership, part of being a conscious leader is that you're integrated and you're authentic. That's at least one aspect of it. And so tell me more about making the business case for integrated human beings as leaders and get away from the male-female debate for a moment.
I think I want to share maybe how I ended up getting into this work. And my mentor, Alan Gray, who is a man. And Alan was my first experience of real conscious leadership. So he's now passed away. I met him when he was in his 70s already. And even at that point in his life, he was still very large in stature, very large in personality, and very purpose-driven person. So he started the largest investment firm from South Africa. And it's always really interesting to tell his story because he's one of, everyone's heard of, the Warren Buffetts of the world. And Alan was very private. And so not a lot of people know his story. And in the 70s, he started his investment firm in South Africa. And he lives through apartheid as a white man. He was witnessing all of the injustices that were there. And he always had this dream to be able to give back to South Africa and to his society. And actually, under apartheid, he even offered that he wanted to give 20% of his then thriving investment management business and set up a charitable organization that would fund Black entrepreneurs, like just to help Black people at the time. It wasn't entrepreneurs yet. And of course, under apartheid, that was rejected. And like, why would you do that? But he did have a chance to then come back. And after apartheid, then in 2003, when the South African government started to try to empower and to have certain business practices that would empower the Black community, at that point, he was able to give 20% of his business to an organization that we called E Squared. And E Squared was a venture capital firm that sponsored Black social entrepreneurs. And Alan also created a foundation that, in addition to sponsoring the entrepreneurial ideas, was giving scholarships to students. Even as we ended up going as young as the age of 13, I think. And I just can you imagine finding a 13-year-old that you think has entrepreneurial capacities that you would then fund to go through school, go through university, go through the accelerator that was created in South Africa, and then fund that person's business. So he really created an incredible ecosystem. And what was amazing for me, because I left the law firm to go work for Alan, and we didn't have any of these conscious capitalism conversations at the law firm. And so when I went to work for Alan, I thought, oh my God, what an incredible way to run a business. They have 100 billion under management currently in assets and offices in 11 countries. So this is a successful business, right? We're talking about conscious capitalism. We have the capitalism part down. He really did it. And what was amazing is that when I went to go work for him in 2015, he decided to give away his entire controlling stake in the business to the foundation. And we created a single entity, a foundation that was the controlling stake of all of the businesses. So all of the profits from the investment management firm now go to fund social entrepreneurs and their education in South Africa. And it's this incredible symbiotic relationship. And it's symbiotic because this is good for the business too. It's not just good for South Africa and all of the incredible work that he's doing. The clients that go into Alan Gray for their investment portfolio, when they know where their money is going, it's not just going to buy a bigger yacht like it is for most hedge fund managers. It is going to fund social entrepreneurs. Then the clients were behind him. And the more that he gave, the bigger his business got. And the more the client wanted to come in and be part of this message, be part of this movement, because they can ensure that there is long-term success, both for the business, but that it is also going for a great cause. And I think this is really the business case, is that when your customers, when your clients, when your employees, they see the good that you're trying to create, they're going to be more supportive, more loyal, and your business will actually flourish.
So it's also interesting to me, and I'd love your reaction to this. One could argue that we've never been in a more uncertain time in terms of just the economic and political outlook. Or if you know what the economics and political outlook is going to look like over the next 2 or 3 years, let alone 5 years, good luck, right? At the same time, we've got an unprecedented level of technological disruption on the horizon. We have AI, we have the biotech revolution, we have quantum computing, nanotechnology, all of these things coming along and disrupting. on the pure business side of things. Now, I would argue that in order to manage in this kind of environment, we've got to have leaders that can really, one, deal with uncertainty, be grounded enough to be able to deal with uncertainty, and work with their teams and organizations to manage the old FUD factor, fear, uncertainty, and doubt, because it will be a natural thing in this wholly fluid time for there to be a lot of fear, uncertainty, and doubt in an organization or on a team. How do you respond to that in terms of, the role of a conscious leader who's integrated?
Well, I love this question because in the book, I offer the true model of leadership. And it is the 4 areas that through my executive coaching work, I really believe that leaders need to master. And the true model is because you have to be true to yourself. But the true model is the T is for mastering time, and R is for mastering relationships. U is for mastering uncertainty. So right to your point. And E is for mastering emotions. And again, if you think about the archetype of the feminine and the archetype of the masculine is the association with the left brain. So it is rational, it is linear, it is certain. And actually, the right brain consciousness can be quite chaotic and uncertain. And so when you connect with that feminine, it is also giving yourself permission to not know. And I'm sure that you've had this conversation many times, but one of the things people say doesn't work about conscious capitalism is that you have too many masters, right? So it's much easier to say we care about profits. That's easy. That's certain. But now we have to balance. So we have to care about the planet, and we have to care about our customers, and we have to care about the employees, and also we have to care about profits. How do we know? In what proportion? How do we do this? It's a lot of uncertainty. And a lot of leaders will say, well, that's just too complicated. It's too messy. It doesn't work. If we focus on profits, then we can all align. At least we all know what we're doing. And so you need to have courage in yourself and give yourself real permission to say, I don't know, and connect with stillness and say, I'm going to give myself space between stimulus and response, and I'm going to sit with this, because traditionally, the way that we view leadership, you have to have all the answers. And to say that I don't have all the answers because there is uncertainty is the most important thing that we can do right now, because otherwise businesses are going to make a lot of really big mistakes. And your business can be over if you don't embrace uncertainty, and if you can't find that courage to say that it's okay that we don't know. We have to see what happens, because nobody can know right now.
And the corollary of that is creating psychological safety on the team for the team to debate different options and different scenarios. And if it is the great man theory of leadership, where the great man is expected to pronounce where we're going and everything else, you run into a challenge because it is uncertain. We don't know, even if you pretend you do. But to get different voices at the table and different perspectives, you need to create psychological safety. And that's, traditionally driven. I'd like to know how that fits in with your true model in terms of the creation of psychological safety on teams and in an organization.
It's interesting because right now there's a lot of buzzwords that get thrown around that make people uncomfortable. And I know that when people hear psychological safety, then they think DEI, and then they think of all of the, political conversations that we're having right now. And I think it's really important to be objective and balanced as much as we can, to say that what we want is the values of safety and of belonging and of inclusion. And that we can also say that in certain situations, the way that this has been implemented in certain organizations might not work. and that there are organizations that are rethinking the way that they treat these values. And because this is a very emotional topic for a lot of people right now, and I think it's really important to address both sides. And for people who are more, right leaning, psychological safety doesn't have to be this antagonistic term that is lumped in with practices that you might not agree with. Psychological safety is simply making sure that people have the right and the freedom without fear to express their best ideas and to be themselves. Because what happens, the way that we stifle creativity and innovation is through fear. And if we are in fear of losing our job, of our livelihood, of coming home and not being able to support our families, then we're not going to think outside the box and propose things that are potentially going to elevate the organization time and time again, but we're too worried to be controversial. And so I really, I'm trying to be mindful of how these certain buzzwords are being interpreted through the political lens that we're living through. And just to say, you don't have to use that term. All you have to know is if you want to get the best out of your people, then you want to make sure that they feel that they can speak up, because otherwise you're not going to get those really innovative, interesting ideas, and that's going to really set your organization back.
Yeah, so I think it's like Gabor Mate talks about, right? That we need as human beings, we need to be authentic. It's safe to be who I am and express my feelings and my emotions. And we also need to be attached. We need that acceptance. And ideally, we should have both. We shouldn't have to trade off one for the other. In a family as well as in an organization, you should be able to feel safe and accepted and belong, and you can be true to yourself. And I think if you create a culture like that where people can do that, then you tap into the best wisdom that everybody can bring, and you need that. You need everybody's wisdom, right? And it's funny that if you think about families as an analog to a business, right? A business can be thought about as kind of a family. And a family functions best when it has both a healthy mother and a healthy father, right? But businesses, typically, we have one person at the top, mostly a man. But if I look at companies like Southwest Airlines, for example, they had Herb Kelleher and they had Colleen Barrett. And Colleen used to say, Herb is the dad and I'm the mom, right? And they really complemented each other beautifully. And you need both sides, because otherwise, unless you are a truly integrated being able to manifest and bring both of those things into existence, it's going to be biased one side or the other, right? So having that combination is interesting to me. Mother and father, M and F, and then masculine and feminine, right? So M is for masculine and M is for mother, and F is for feminine and F is for father, But there's something there that these things, I think, need to go together, right? Mother energy, father energy. And when I worked with a coach for the first time, I think I've written about this and we may have talked about it here in 2018. And she heard about the story of my life and my work. And ultimately, she's concluded, or she summarized it by saying that you spent 45 years trying to honor your father or trying to impress your father. And now you spend the last 15 honoring your mother with your work. Right? That all of the work in conscious capitalism and everything since is about bringing that into the world, right? And I think that is something that's very, very strongly needed. And I think your book is going to do a lot to move that conversation forward.
Thank you, Raj. And just to say that mother-father energy could also be reversed. I think of some businesses that I know where the woman has a lot more masculine energy, and the man actually has more of the feminine values and is more concerned about bringing love and empathy and connection to the organization, and the woman is more driving the business. So you can still have the mother and the father and the masculine feminine with the gender being reversed.
Exactly.
And that's completely fine as well. And I know it's quite interesting because a lot of people who know me well, they think it's quite funny that I wrote a book on feminine intelligence, because they say that I'm quite masculine for a woman in my energy. And again, nothing to do with your looks, with how you carry yourself, but because I tend to be very driven, I also tend to be very rational. I mean, I was a corporate lawyer in New York, so I was really in my masculine, and it was, everybody says that you write the book you need. And this is the irony, is that I think I spend so much time in my masculine and in achievement and in valuing, profits and how I respond in business situations, that it took me having to go back and get a degree in psychology and understand spirituality, and it's very difficult for me actually to connect to my feminine. And that's why I appreciate how important it is. That's the irony, that maybe people, when they see this book, they think that I'm advocating for something that's just so easy for me. It's the opposite. I think it's much easier for me to be in my masculine and just perform and be efficient and productive. Like that's for me the easy part. But understanding that other people are involved and that it's about interconnection and that you can only go so far by yourself, and bringing others along and listening, really, really listening. I mean, that's really hard. And that was the hardest thing to learn when I started to be a coach, is actually how to really listen for the things that are not being said, right? For the way that people say them. And most of us, we think we're great listeners. I used to think that too. And the vast majority of us aren't. And I think feminine intelligence, one of the key aspects, it starts with listening, to understand what other people are feeling and what other people are thinking, because we think that there is an objective truth and we see, reality, but there is no reality. Capitalism is a story that we've invented, that we tell ourselves, and money is a story that we've invented. And all of these things that we talk about, they're not objective reality. So when we are so sure of the answer, then we are missing the potential for so much. And I think the feminine is really about being more open, more curious, more able to listen and to hold different perspectives, which, as Timothy said, especially now in this time of uncertainty, is so critical. And by the way, with AI, it's going to be able to do all of our left brain things much better than us very soon. It can write our books, it can fill out our spreadsheets, and it can really do a lot more than we can. And I think the way that we're going, that the feminine values are going to be more and more important as AI becomes more and more prevalent in the workforce.
I always want to explore just a slightly different aspect of your book and of your own personal journey recently, which is, when we talk about conscious leadership, we get into this discussion of what does it mean to increase one's awareness or self-awareness, right? At the core of consciousness is this idea of awareness, self-awareness. I'm aware of myself. I'm aware of how I tend one way or the other way, and over time, why I tend in that direction versus another. And when you get into these discussions, you do get into a lot of discussion about, well, I'm reacting to the way my father treated me when I was growing up. I'm reacting to the way my mother treated me when I was growing up. And Raj, I know that in your work, the whole idea of healing, of going back and healing these childhood wounds that we now know have an impact on how we show up as adults, right? And I'd love you to talk about how your pivot is a little bit towards healing, and how do we start to heal some of those, either call them childhood wounds or psychological paradigms that have affected who we are today and how we show up as leaders.
Oh, this is such a beautiful question, because everything starts with self. If you want to be a conscious parent, you want to be a conscious partner, you want to be a conscious leader, then it all starts from within. And this is the place that we often don't want to look. And it's very interesting that, my journey working with a lot of leaders, and I kept questioning, how to go deeper, because a lot of times people would come with very similar surface level business problems, And as you say, the root was always something with my father, sometimes with my mother. A lot of these childhood experiences and young adult experiences. And I'm obviously being trained in clinical psychology, I think that this is a very important aspect of ourselves to go through self-exploration. And you mentioned in the beginning of my bio, so I'll bring this up now, is that my curiosity of how we go deeper is I ended up going to retrain as a psychedelic-assisted therapist. So I've never actually practiced this because it's illegal and I'm a lawyer. So I don't practice, but I went to study it to understand and to understand the research and to see how this can really help people. And truly, I believe that these medicines under specific, under supervision, in very specific, with specific criteria, should be legalized because they can truly heal and help people. And what happens in a psychedelic experience is that you're able to face your demons and your past without fear, because our conscious mind creates a barrier for us to even access some of those memories because they are too painful, they're too scary, and we protect ourselves from them. So very often in a psychedelic experience, people remember something that they've never remembered in their entire life before, that they feel something, they experience something that they cannot believe could be possible. And this happened to me, of course, and I share this in my book. And what is really important, I think, for people to understand is, you know, people get worried when we talk about psychedelics, and they think about, the 80s and the 80s with MDMA, which was a crisis, the 60s with LSD and psilocybin, which was a crisis. And what I advocate for, what I write about in my book, it's not recreational use. It's not going to the nightclub and popping some pills. What psychedelic therapy is a completely different situation. And for anyone that's considering it, then first of all, please go to a jurisdiction where it's legal. So you can go to Jamaica, you can go to the Netherlands, you can go to parts of South America. Please find a credible guide, because this is not something that you should do on your own. Someone who can really prepare you so that you can understand, what am I trying to get out of this? What is my goal? What is my intention? This is an extremely important part, to know what is your purpose for doing this. And equally so, the integration, which is what we call the time after you have the experience. Because very often people will go on these, adventures, and they don't come back with anything. Maybe they feel love, or they experience something, they have an insight, but they don't then bring it back into their life. There is no so what moment. And the story I tell in the book of an experience I had was with psilocybin, and it was very deeply connected to nature. And I felt Mother Earth, I felt her breathing, I felt her rage about everything that we're doing. And it was this huge sense of responsibility and understanding that I am nature, that we are all nature, we are not separate, but to really reassess my entire understanding of myself within nature. And I could have left it there. I could have said, now I understand and I feel, and there you go. And that's what a lot of people do. They have the experience, it's very powerful, it's very moving, but then they leave it there. Because I was able to have integration sessions and understand what can I do with it, I ended up joining an organization called the Earth Law Center, which is a nonprofit, which is basically nature's lawyers. And we try to align human laws with nature's laws and give a legal right to rivers and oceans and certain species, and completely change the law from environmental law to what we're calling earth law. And we've created a curriculum and working with different governments on being able to do this. So there is a very clear connection for me with conscious leadership. Because when you understand yourself and you have these experiences that completely break you open, where you cannot access this with your rational mind, and you can experience true love and want to bring that into the world, and you can start to see things that you've never seen before, right? So psychedelics, it's like, imagine that your brain is a city, and you're used to taking, you go to work, you take the same road over and over again. That's the neural pathway that you're constantly using. And then you go to drop your child off at school and you're using that neural pathway. And we have our ingrained neural pathways that we're always using. And what psychedelics do is they create new neural pathways. And so all of a sudden we can take a road trip to a place that we didn't know existed before. And all of the street lights are on, and we're able to illuminate ideas and go to places that we never imagined. And you can't think your way there. It's impossible. And so because of neuroplasticity, our brains are able to evolve and understand different things. And so for me, this is a way that you can truly awaken and truly step into consciousness. And if you do it in an intentional and safe way, and think about, what does this mean for how can I bring this now into the world with positive impact through my organization? I think just as I have found something authentic to me with the Earth Law Center, I think that people can find ways to do this. And I'm very inspired, of course, by John Mackey, who writes about this in his new book, that his experiences with MDMA made him realize that he wants to bring love into the organization. It was one of the values that he built Whole Foods with, and he was very lucky that at the time it was actually legal when he was young, and it gave him those ideas. And of course, Raj also writes about his experiences in Awaken. And I mean, I think it says something that the co-founders of Conscious Capitalism can speak openly about their experiences and how it frames their understanding of conscious leadership. So I do really believe in the power of these medicines when done appropriately. And I do hope that that the capitalistic model doesn't create a situation actually which makes these medicines inaccessible, because we take too greedy of an approach, and it causes problems, and then we won't have access. So there's always that possibility, but I hope it doesn't happen.
Well, Elina, you've woven a really fascinating set of topics that goes all the way from feminine and masculine polarity all the way to really being self-aware and how to increase your self-awareness, which allows you to be a more conscious, a more authentic, a more integrated leader. So thank you for writing the book, and thank you for being our guest today. It was a wonderful conversation. I wish you the best with the book launch. And thank you for being our guest.
Thank you. It was really a pleasure.
And for those of you that are listening, if you enjoyed today's conversation, then please feel free to hit the subscribe button on whatever channel you're listening in on. And if you feel so moved, go on over to iTunes on Apple and leave us a review and a rating. We always appreciate the feedback. And thank you to our producer today, Riverside Productions, and to Conscious Capitalism, Inc., who sponsors this program and makes it available and helps us distribute it. So thank you all, and we'll see you next week.